The moment you awaken not from sleep, but from illusion, there is no fanfare. No trumpet of joy greets the soul when it first sees clearly. There is only a soft, almost imperceptible breaking. The veil that once painted the world in hues of purpose and meaning becomes translucent, and behind it, a slow, endless churn, the machinery of becoming without destination. You were not born into a story. You were thrown into a pattern of repetition, dressed in the flesh of dreams, given just enough hope to keep walking. The truth is not loud. It does not shout its arrival. It waits, patient as the void, in the corners of your quietest moments. It is there when you laugh and feel nothing. It is there when you reach for love and touch a mirror. The bitter truth of life is not that we suffer, but that suffering is the fabric of what we are. Like the echoing hum of electricity beneath the silence of a house, it is never absent. We distract ourselves with movement, invention, belief, but all these are masks we offer to a God who never speaks back. Pleasure is not the opposite of pain. It is its accomplice. Every joy we feel contains within it the shadow of its own ending. We chase ecstasy, not because it satisfies, but because it gives us momentary amnesia. And in those fleeting seconds of reprieve, we forget that existence is an appetite with no object. The will desires, not because something is worthy of desire, but because it knows no other mode of being. It moves, and movement is mistaken for purpose. But beneath the motion, there is no destination, only hunger begetting hunger. Modernity, in its sterile brightness, has tried to sterilize despair. It wraps the void in algorithms and markets, convincing the lonely that connection is a product, that meaning is a metric, that peace is a subscription away. But the soul does not forget. Beneath the digital noise, something ancient still aches. You scroll endlessly, not for entertainment, but for a ghost of yourself you hope to find reflected, a self unfractured, unlost. But the mirror is broken, and each shard shows a different face. None of them are you. None of them ever were. The world does not need your optimism. It does not care for your ambition. It only watches, impassive, as you exhaust yourself, trying to extract permanence from impermanence, identity from flux, certainty from chaos. The absurdity of life is not its cruelty, but its indifference. We are born with minds that seek order into a world that offers only chance. We invent gods, laws, narratives, anything to place a frame around the formless. But the frame always cracks, and when it does, we are left staring into the raw, unmediated vastness of what is. There is a moment perhaps in the quiet after a funeral, or in the stillness of insomnia when the illusion collapses entirely. You see, not with your eyes, but with something deeper, that no one is coming to save you, that no amount of achievement will fill the hole, that the people you love will die, and you too will vanish, without ceremony. This is not a tragedy, it is simply the architecture of being. What we call meaning is often just the fear of facing this architecture unshielded. But there is a strange solace in this exposure. When you cease expecting life to console you, you begin to hear its true tone. Not kind, not cruel, simply there. A wind through empty branches. A ripple across an unmoved lake. You are not meant to be happy. You are not meant to be fulfilled. These are marketing slogans dressed as destiny. You are meant to see, and in seeing, to release the lie that you were ever owed anything but this moment, this breath, this brief flicker of awareness before the darkness returns. Do you feel it? That quiet settling? The nervous flutter of the will growing still? It is not depression, it is clarity, the pain of waking from a long, soft dream. The world, stripped of its illusions, becomes almost beautiful, not because it offers hope, but because it no longer needs to. It simply is. And in that isness, there is peace, cold and indifferent, like the stars. The will is not a companion, it is a tyrant veiled in longing. It does not ask what is good, only what is wanted. And in this wanting, the world is consumed, not cherished. Every tree becomes timber. Every face becomes validation. Every silence becomes a threat. What we call civilization is merely the machinery of will, scaling itself a cathedral of craving built on the bones of the present. No one lives here. We all exist in a perpetual elsewhere, hoping the next desire will silence the last. But the hunger is structural. It is not solved. It is inherited. Suffering is not an aberration. It is the atmosphere in which consciousness breathes. To exist is to feel lack, and to feel lack is to suffer. Even in comfort, the unease persists, the anxiety of time slipping, the body aging, the familiar decaying into the unfamiliar. Joy, when it arises, is the temporary relief of pressure, the ebb of tension. But like the tide, it returns to the ocean of pain from which it came. We do not escape suffering, we only shift its mask from grief to boredom, from loneliness to obligation, from yearning to regret. All roads, in the end, lead back to the self, that unrelenting source of thirst. People speak of love as if it were redemption, but love, too, is a contract with pain. To love is to invite loss. The moment affection deepens, so too does the shadow of its ending. What we cling to most becomes the blade we fear most to lose. And so we hold with trembling hands, not because we are secure, but because we are terrified. What a fragile thing, this tethering of souls in a world where everything slips. The more deeply we tie ourselves to another, the more the specter of absence haunts us. And yet, we love not because it saves us, but because we do not know how not to reach across the void. The illusion of selfhood is the cruelest trick of all. We believe we are singular, enduring, coherent, but we are process, flux, a confluence of impressions with no fixed core. We are not beings, but becomings. What you call you is a performance in time, stitched together by memory and anticipation. There is no solid center. Only a mirror reflecting a mirror, both convinced they see something real. This illusion of identity births all suffering. For we mourn the imagined self we believe can be preserved. But nothing is preserved. Everything is given, then taken. Detachment is not withdrawal, it is awakening. To detach is not to renounce the world, but to see it for what it is: transient, unsatisfying, ceaselessly changing. The detached man does not hate life. He simply ceases to be fooled by it. He no longer seeks permanence in impermanent things, nor meaning in the arbitrary movements of fate. He walks not with despair, but with quiet clarity. His joy is not in the world, but in freedom from it. He smiles at the futility, not because he is above it, but because he has ceased to resist what cannot be changed. The modern soul, taught to chase instead of see, withers beneath the noise. Every moment is monetized, every thought turned into content, every breath caught in the machinery of exposure. There is no inner life, only the projected image. But the soul is not fooled. It hungers in silence, not for attention, but for depth. It longs to stop pretending, to be unseen, to be still. But stillness is punished. In this world, to rest is to be forgotten. So we perform our suffering, decorate our despair, filter our loneliness. And all the while, the real self, that wordless ache beneath, is buried alive. And yet, in the midst of this, there is an eerie serenity. When one stops believing the lies, when one no longer demands happiness, a strange calm emerges. Life does not change, but the grip loosens. One watches the world pass like clouds, no longer chasing, no longer naming. The sorrow remains, but it no longer wounds. It becomes part of the air, part of the taste of time. And in that surrender, a kind of freedom, not the jubilant kind, but the quiet, monk-like freedom of one who has accepted the limits of what is. Every man is born with a wound, not of the body, but of the soul. It opens not with injury, but with awareness. The sudden, jarring comprehension that to exist is to lack, and to lack is to reach forever without rest. This wound is invisible, yet it dictates all things. Every desire is a bandage that fails to heal. Every belief a distraction from the pain beneath. The will to life, in its blind and monstrous instinct, does not care for peace. It only wants to go on, and in going on, it consumes itself. It is the serpent devouring its own tail, mistaking the pain of its hunger for the promise of satisfaction. We are thrown into the world, not chosen for it. No one asked to be, and yet here we are torn from the silence of non-existence into the deafening clamor of need. The infant does not rejoice in birth. It screams. That cry is not a celebration, it is a protest, an ancient echo of the suffering that life immediately demands. And from that first gasp, the path unfolds, not toward fulfillment, but toward an endless series of substitutions. What we call a life is merely a sequence of delays, one disappointment postponed by the next. The child longs to be grown, the grown long to be young again, and in between lies the theater of endless distraction. What pride we take in progress, as if the sophistication of our prisons makes them any less confining. The cities grow, the machines hum, the lights flicker in rhythmic defiance of night, and still man weeps. He weeps beneath skyscrapers, as he once did beneath trees. No invention touches the root of sorrow, for sorrow is not circumstantial. It is structural. It lies in the relation between what we are and what we desire to be. And that chasm, that unbridgeable rift between inner yearning and outer reality, remains untouched by any technology. We solve problems only to discover new ones. The ground beneath remains soaked with the same ancient grief. Even pleasure becomes a subtle form of punishment. For every joy we taste is a reminder of its own absence. The sweeter the moment, the sharper its ending. One cannot possess beauty, one can only mourn it in real time. Love becomes a prelude to separation, success a precursor to decline, peace a fragile pause before the next storm. The soul begins to dread its own happiness, knowing too well the cost that follows. This is not cynicism, it is fidelity to experience. One must look life in the face and say, you have nothing to offer but yourself. And yourself is not enough. Hope, that sacred lie, keeps the machinery turning, not because it delivers, but because without it we might stop. Hope is the leash that keeps the beast of will chained to motion. It whispers, tomorrow will be different, though tomorrow is built of the same dust as today. We pursue because we are wired to, not because the object of pursuit contains redemption. Even the saints, even the wise, are tempted by the ghost of hope that perhaps there is an exception, a secret, a way out. But the trap is universal. There is no secret, only surrender. To surrender is not to collapse, it is to remove the mask of expectation and stand bare before what is. It is to say, I will no longer beg this world to be other than it is. In this, there is a dignity not found in striving. The man who ceases to chase does not give up, he awakens. He walks more slowly, speaks less quickly, touches the world with gentler hands. He knows that nothing belongs to him, not even his name. The self is a garment worn briefly, then shed. What remains is not identity, but awareness, stripped of ornament, undistracted by performance. Nature, which birthed us, remains indifferent. The sun rises, not to bless us, but to burn. The ocean sings no lullaby, it drowns without thought. Trees do not mourn their fallen leaves. The cosmos spins in majestic cruelty, vast and empty of comfort. And yet, within this cold immensity, there is something exquisite in the silence. The absence of meaning is itself a kind of invitation not to invent purpose, but to dissolve into what has always been. The ego resists this. It wants to matter, but the soul, tired of the lie, yearns to vanish. In vanishing, we return to the source. Not heaven, not paradise, but the undisturbed stillness that existed before desire began. Death is not the enemy, it is the release. The will fears it, for the will cannot imagine rest. But consciousness, freed from the illusion of continuity, finds in death not punishment, but peace. This is not to be mourned, it is to be understood. To die is to become once more what we were before we were named. And in that namelessness, perhaps, the final illusion falls away. If you wish, I will continue deeper still into the realm where even the voice forgets itself. Time is the silent executioner of all illusions. It does not wound with cruelty, but with inevitability. Every joy is aged as soon as it is born. Every moment, the self you think you are dies, replaced by the next illusion, clothed in memory and bound by anticipation. We think we build a life, yet what we build is a mausoleum of moments already lost, echoes of what was once felt and can never be touched again. The present is no more than a fleeting threshold between two absences, and yet we cling to it as though it could anchor us against the tide of oblivion. What is memory, if not a museum of suffering? Even our happiest recollections bear the bitter sting of absence. Nostalgia is not joy revisited, it is pain recollected through a softer lens. We remember, not to celebrate, but because forgetting feels like a second death. And so we wander back through corridors of what once was, trying to resurrect warmth from shadows. But shadows do not comfort. They only remind us that the sun has moved on. To live is to grieve continuously, not for others, but for the parts of ourselves that time has silently stolen. There is a strange violence in being perceived. To be seen is to be defined, and to be defined is to be diminished. The gaze of others carves you into fragments, each one distorted by their need, their projection, their misunderstanding. And so you become an actor in the theater of expectations, donning masks not to deceive but to survive. Authenticity becomes a risk, intimacy a negotiation. Even love, in its deepest form, demands a shape you may not inhabit. And so the soul retreats, building inner cathedrals where it can whisper truths that no ear will hear. Art emerges not from happiness, but from the failure of life to satisfy. The beautiful is born from the terrible, shaped by hands that have trembled, by eyes that have stared too long into the abyss and found the abyss staring back with a curious tenderness. We create not to escape pain, but to transmute it into form, to say, here is my sorrow, sculpted into something still. And yet even art is not salvation. It is a gesture noble, fleeting, ultimately forgotten. What moves us today will one day be dust, but in that dust lies a trace of the soul's refusal to be silenced. Sleep offers a brief rehearsal for death, and we crave it not for rest, but for the vanishing. In sleep, we forget the performance, the ache, the ceaseless procession of wanting. We are no one. We drift in a world without consequence, and upon waking, the weight returns the gravity of identity, the summons of will. But there is a part of us that resents the dawn, that longs to remain in that unformed realm where nothing is asked and nothing must be endured. Perhaps it is the only honest part, the only voice that remembers what freedom once felt like. Religion, at its core, is the language of the broken, not the weak, but the weary, those who have seen that life cannot fulfill its promises and yet must go on breathing. It offers not truth, but comfort, and in that comfort, a soft denial. But even denial, when tender, is a mercy. For the truth, unvarnished, is unlivable to most. To gaze into the face of meaninglessness without flinching requires a discipline few are trained to bear. And so we kneel, not out of faith, but out of the unbearable weight of solitude. Detachment is not a virtue, it is a necessity. To love without clinging, to lose without despair, to live without demand, these are not ideals, but requirements for sanity in a world that offers everything and delivers nothing. One does not renounce out of superiority, but out of exhaustion. The soul, having chased every light, finally sits in the dark and discovers that the dark too is sacred. For in that darkness, there is no more running, there is only being, and in being, one finds a kind of truth that words cannot hold. Even in silence, there is a sound, the sound of the world forgetting you, and perhaps that is not to be feared, but welcomed. Oblivion is not the enemy, it is the home we were torn from. What we dread as extinction may in truth be return. Return to the nameless, the unformed, the unburdened, where no one watches and no one waits. Where suffering ceases not because it is conquered, but because the one who suffers is no more. There comes a moment in every conscious life when the veil no longer suffices. The illusions, once comforting in their false promise, grow threadbare. They no longer shield, they expose. The narratives collapse, and what stands beneath is not enlightenment, but the raw architecture of being, an endless process of striving, suffering, and fading. One sees then that everything we loved, feared, or hoped for was born of the same root, the will to continue, a blind urge, senseless and undignified, masquerading as virtue, dressed in the language of dreams. To look upon this truth without flinching is to be devoured by it. The mind, trained to construct and cling, recoils. It invents purpose like a man lost in the desert invents an oasis. It builds scaffolds of meaning atop a void. But the void does not care. It offers neither approval nor condemnation. It simply is. And when the scaffolds fall, we are left dangling in open air, stripped of purpose, burdened only with breath. It is here, in this naked exposure, that the real self emerges not triumphant, but silent, not strong, but hollowed by clarity. Suffering is the thread upon which all consciousness is strung. We speak of it as an event, a wound among many, but in truth it is the substance of awareness itself. To be is to be deprived. The senses crave, the mind compares, the body decays. Even the moments we call happiness are merely intervals in which suffering is momentarily obscured. But it lurks, patient, beneath every surface, the ache of entropy, the weight of being time-bound, the certainty that all will be lost and that nothing can be held. And yet we try, endlessly, absurdly, to hold. There is no greater torment than hope unfulfilled, and yet we return to it like moths to flame. Every hope, once dashed, leaves behind a scar not just of loss, but of the betrayal inherent in wanting. For to want is to believe in the possibility of satisfaction, and that belief is the cruelest deception of all. The will deceives us not with malice, but with necessity. It must move forward, even if it knows the ground will crumble. It must desire, even if it knows the object will rot in the hand. And so we persist, not in freedom, but in compulsion. One might imagine that love could save us, but love too is hunger in disguise. It seeks not the other, but the completion of the self, through the other. It makes promises, it cannot keep permanence, unity, peace, all fantasies projected onto a being as frail and transient as ourselves. And when the illusion falters, we feel betrayed, not by the other, but by the nature of the world itself. We mourn not only the love that failed, but the dream that love could have made anything permanent. Even in its beauty, love carries the seed of despair. True detachment does not come from wisdom, but from weariness. One lets go not because one has transcended, but because one has collapsed. After countless repetitions of the same disappointment, the soul grows still. It no longer reaches out, not in bitterness, but in quiet understanding. The world is as it is, and it will not change to meet our longing. In this stillness, there is no ecstasy, there is no light, but there is a space wide enough to breathe without needing to become. A space where the self dissolves into observation, unburdened by the need to act. Modernity, with its constant motion and distraction, cannot tolerate this stillness. It must anesthetize the soul with novelty. The noise must never cease, for in silence the truth becomes audible. And the truth is unbearable, that we are alone in a universe that does not recognize us, that our stories are inventions, and that the love we seek must contend with impermanence at every turn. So we are given endless entertainment, endless consumption, endless stimulation, all designed to keep us from hearing the quiet, persistent whisper. This is all there is. Yet there is a strange grace in confronting that whisper. When the distractions fall away and one looks directly into the void, something softens, not with joy, but with release. The struggle ends, not in victory, but in surrender. One ceases to beg from life what it cannot give, and in that ceasing, a different kind of peace arises, not the peace of fulfillment, but the peace of relinquishment. One no longer asks why, or how, or when. One simply abides, not because one must, but because all else has failed. If you wish, I shall continue this descent deeper still, where even silence becomes a kind of language, and detachment a form of compassion for a world that cannot help but suffer. There is no healing, only forgetting. The wounds we carry do not close with time, they are simply buried beneath new distractions, new names, new forms of suffering. Memory does not fade out of mercy. It fades because the mind, overwhelmed, must choose what to lose. And in losing, we are hollowed. We walk not with scars that teach, but with absences that weigh. The deepest sorrows are not those that scream, they are the ones that settle into silence, shaping the rhythm of our thoughts, like invisible tides pulling the shore inward. Every attachment is a wager against reality. To cling is to believe, against all evidence, that something can be made safe in a world that erases everything. We attach not because we are strong, but because we are afraid. The child reaches for the mother, not out of knowledge, but out of need. And the adult, though clothed in intellect, repeats the same gesture to a lover, to a belief, to an identity. But the object of attachment is never stable. It shifts, decays, disappears. And we, in turn, are left holding the outline of what was, mourning not only the loss, but the hope that once made it radiant. Illusion is the lifeblood of the will. Without it, the machinery collapses. The illusion of progress, of meaning, of self-improvement, all these are necessary to keep the suffering from being seen in its naked form. We decorate our cages with ambition and call it growth. We rename our cravings as goals and celebrate the chase. But beneath the surface, the truth remains unchanged. We run not toward fulfillment, but away from despair. The treadmill offers no exit. It only gives the illusion of motion, and for most, that is enough. What we call strength is often a refined form of denial. The ability to carry on, to endure, to perform normalcy while the soul disintegrates. This is praised as resilience, but it is not. It is exhaustion masquerading as function. The truly strong are not those who push forward, but those who stop and see, who sit with the emptiness without dressing it in names, who acknowledge that even the best life, the most beautiful life, is still filled with longing, decay, and eventual erasure. To see this and not turn away, that is clarity, not courage. The body, too, becomes a site of betrayal. It promises strength in youth, seduction in form, continuity in motion, but each promise is revoked without warning. We watch ourselves vanish by degrees, not in a single moment, but in the slow erosion of vitality, the creeping frailty, the small humiliations of time. Hair thins, joints ache, eyes dim, and with each change, the illusion of control falters. We are not the masters of our bodies, we are their passengers, and they, indifferent vessels, are already decaying the moment we arrive. In detachment, there is not coldness, but depth. One does not become indifferent because the world is unloved. One becomes indifferent because one has loved it too deeply and found that it could not answer. The detached man still walks among others, still feels the texture of the air, still watches the sun break through clouds. But he no longer asks the world to give him what it cannot. He takes the beauty without hope, the pain without resistance. He lives, not because he believes, but because breath continues. And that, somehow, is enough. Even silence speaks, if one listens. Not with language, but with presence. In the absence of noise, one hears the faint murmur of being itself, unadorned, unfiltered. It says nothing of meaning. It offers no comfort. It simply is. And to dwell in that isness without protest is to glimpse what lies beyond the will, a kind of stillness untouched by striving, a peace not of achievement, but of cessation. It cannot be chased. It arrives only when everything else is lost. In the end, even the voice falls silent, not from weakness, but from reverence for what can be said when the final veil is lifted. When the last illusion dies and the self stands alone before the mirror of nothingness, words become too heavy, too clumsy to carry the weight of what is seen. And what is seen is not horror, but stillness, not despair, but the quiet end of longing. The flame no longer flickers because the wind of desire has ceased. All that was loved is gone, and yet the ache of it lingers like smoke in a room long emptied. Every gesture, every name, every face dissolved into the formless. And you, once the center of it all, are now merely a trace, a breath upon the glass, vanishing. But there is no fear in this, for fear belongs to the will, and the will is tired now. It has fought its long, futile war against impermanence, and at last it lays down its arms. The war was never winnable. The enemy was time itself. One does not die when the heart stops. One dies when wanting ends, when the final wish for love, for recognition, for one more moment is surrendered like a leaf falling into black water. There is no sound, no struggle, only descent, not downward, but inward, as if returning to a place that was always there, hidden beneath the noise. It is not home, it is not peace. It is simply the truth, cold, untouched, vast. And yet, there is something beautiful in this bleakness. A kind of dignity in facing the futility and remaining still, not resisting, not embellishing, not fleeing into fantasies of afterlives or reincarnations or cosmic justice. The world is unjust by its very structure. Suffering is not punished, joy is not rewarded, things simply happen, and we, tiny lanterns of awareness flickering for a moment, are carried through it, unable to change its course, only to witness. The wise do not seek redemption, they seek release. Not the lifting of sorrow, but the loosening of attachment, the quiet disintegration of selfhood, so that even suffering loses its subject. Pain without a name is not pain, it is weather, it passes. The one who has stepped beyond the personal does not feel happiness, does not feel grief. He feels nothing, and that nothing is full. Full like a winter sky, vast and indifferent, yet bearing the strange weight of eternity. There is no answer, but in the end, there is no longer a question. The fire has burned down to embers. The voice has said what it could. The eyes have closed, not from weariness, but from the recognition that there is nothing left to see. What remains is not you. What remains is the absence of you, the space cleared of illusion, the quiet left behind after the will departs. This is not triumph, it is not salvation, it is disappearance. And disappearance, at last, is enough.